Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching 5th part of What If Naruto and Sasuke Travel Back in Time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The journey to the predetermined training grounds was mostly quiet and uneventful. Nobody knew what to say, and for the most part, they were more intrigued by the unexpected trip. Neji, for one, was perplexed as to why he had been forced to go on this trip. It was a waste of time in his opinion. He, on the other hand, was not about to disobey an order. He grumbled bitterly, he just had to accept the challenge, didn't he? Team 10, on the other hand, was dreading what lay ahead. They had witnessed Team 7's daily training and had no idea how they were going to survive the trip. The only thing they could think about was when the Chunin exams were. The Jonin were silent for a completely different reason. Zabuza and Kakashi foresaw what was to come, while Guy and Asuma were only trying to avoid detection. Naruto was still reeling from his encounter with Hiashi. Kakashi looked around and nodded to Sasuke as soon as they arrived. Both teams watched in awe and fascination as the raven-haired boy built several layers of seals to create barriers, ensure privacy, and detect intruders. The seals were covering a large area. Returning his attention to his Jonin, Sasuke indicated that the barriers were in place. That was the moment the nearly 20-hour silence was broken. Set up your tents and then attempt to sleep. We'll be getting up early tomorrow, and we'll need you to be rested for the training. Turning to face the teams, Kakashi said. As the genin turned to follow orders, Asuma narrowed his eyes at Kakashi. What's the matter, Kakashi? This is completely out of character for you. Guy arched her brow. While continuing their task, the genin began to pay more attention. Everything will be fine, Asuma. There's no point in telling you now unless it's Sasuke and Naruto's decision to do so. It's their little secret. Guy blinked as everyone turned to look at Team 7, only to notice that their tent had already been set up and all three of them were fast asleep. None of them wanted to miss out on the sleep they would most likely not get during the training. Guy glanced over at Team 8, who had also finished setting up their tents and were now cold. It would always be a mystery how they had done it so quickly. The rest went to bed, resigning themselves to waiting for the answers they desired. Unfortunately for the tired teams, the morning came far too quickly, and before they knew it, they were gathered around a fire eating some sort of stew that Sasuke had prepared before anyone else had awoken. Guy looked over at the two silent genin who had been acting strangely for quite some time as they finished their bowls. Kakashi said we'd have to get your answers from the two of you. Naruto and Sasuke both sighed. They were not looking forward to repeating their explanation. Naruto sighed and took a deep breath before looking around. I'll respond once everyone has finished eating. I'm not going to choke anyone. Naruto paused, realizing that everyone had finished in the time the sentence had taken. Okay, good. Do you want the abridged version or the detailed version, which could take up to an hour? Asuma blinked twice before shaking his head. The version that best explains what is going on, why we are here, and why you two are acting so strange. That's pretty much the long version. Everyone twitched as Sasuke deadpanned. I traveled from the future with Sasuke to prevent the end of the world. Naruto admitted to making everyone who wasn't already aware blanch. That can't be true. Neji choked out the words. It is. In 3 years, a criminal organization known as the Akatsuki will declare war on the entire shinobi world, sparking the Fourth Shinobi War. Naruto began. Were they crazy? Every nation versus them would have resulted in the shortest war in history. Ino stepped in. Yes, it was short in some ways. When the fighting began, it lasted about 3 days. Everyone smirked as Sasuke responded. At the expense of raising the village of Kumo and approximately 2/3 of the world's ninja population. As they processed what had been said, their smirks turned to horror. Not even Teams 7 and 8 were aware of this. How? Shikamaru stammered out his words. It's the long version. To cut a long story short, Sensei, Obito did not die. He was saved by the Jubi's evil will and Madara Uchiha, who was still alive. He tried to return to Konoha only to see Rin die. As a result, he agreed to participate in the plan to resurrect the Jubi. Obito gathered 10 of the world's most powerful nuke nin and repurposed the Akatsuki from a resistance to Hanzo the Salamander to an organization hell-bent on capturing the 9 Biju. Kakazu of the 5 Hearts, a Taki nin who once attempted to kill the Shodem Hokage, Hidan, a Jashin worshipper, Sasori of the Red Sand, and even Itachi Uchiha are among the members. Furthermore, Orochimaru was once a member and was regarded as one of the weaker members. Naruto explained how they could make the colors drain faster from the nin in front of them. Then Sasuke spoke up. They were able to easily capture the Ichi via Nanabi. However, their first attempt to capture the Hachibi failed. Following that, the Raikage convened a 5-cage summit. At the summit, Obito declared war. It would have been 7 against 80,000 shinobi at first, but not only were they able to create 100,000 Zetsu clones, but one of the members used to work for Orochimaru and managed to do a mass Edo Tensei to further strengthen their forces by resurrecting some of history's most powerful ninja. The Akatsuki and the 7 swordsmen, among others, are included. Sasuke elaborated. Naruto continued from there. 40,000 ninja from the allied shinobi forces were killed on the first day alone. Granted, they also managed to cut the Akatsuki's forces in half, but once the Edo Tensei were added to the mix, it was essentially a slaughter. Among the resurrected were former Kaijin, unfortunately, the unbeatable one. Naruto flinched and looked up at the sky. "Who are you, Naruto?" Kakashi inquired, fearful of the answer. He prayed silently that it wasn't Minato. Uchiha Madara, who had finally died. The issue is that Madara has no weaknesses. As an Edo Tensei, he is immortal and never runs out of chakra. Finally, not long before his death, he manifested the Rinnegan. No one could touch him, and if they did, he felt nothing. It only got worse when they resurrected the Jubi. Madara absorbed the Jubi and became even stronger after the Jubi regained most, if not all, of its former strength. We couldn't even get close to him. The rabbit goddess was then freed from her imprisonment in the moon. We actually beat her because she was easier to fight than Madara. Naruto admitted sheepishly. The group gave him an odd look. Sasuke let out a small laugh. Because Dobi was the only one who could sense Zetsu at the time, he was able to sneak up on Madara and rip him in half, allowing Kagaya to absorb the Jubi. Neither Naruto nor Sasuke expected the Jonin to collapse. So Madara's most trusted ally betrayed him? Ino made a squeak. No. Zetsu was never Madara's ally. He was only there to help him free Kagaya. Anyway, after we resealed the Jubi and ended the war, everything went to hell. Konoha began to lose allies as a result of a century of bad decisions and the level of nuke nin produced, which aided in the Jubi's resurrection. No one could trust the village again, especially after Danzo's decisions were revealed. He carried out assassinations without permission, started wars, and caused a slew of other issues. While dirty secrets are common in a hidden village, the Sandaime had allowed it to happen for over 60 years. Not long after, it was discovered that despite resealing the Jubi, its chakra had poisoned the ground. It started to spread and kill animals and crops. Naruto paused to catch his breath. Resources became scarce as a result of the poisoning. With the senjutsu he had learned, the Dobi was able to hold it off for a while and prevent it from affecting Konoha. However, when he offered to do the same for the other countries, they refused. They didn't want anything to do with Konoha or its nin. The countries eventually began to fight for the resources, and Konoha, which had not yet been affected, became their target. We had the cleanest food, water, and medical supplies. This marked the beginning of the Fifth Shinobi War. Sasuke spoke softly. The atmosphere had darkened. I was about 18 or 19 when the war began, and I was 31 when we did the jutsu to return. That was how long we could survive on our own. Naruto murmured. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The enemy forces eventually made their way to the gate, which is when we performed the jutsu. Even though the backlash would kill everyone within the village walls, it was a village-wide decision to do it while the enemy was being held off by the remaining forces. They were going to die either way. They simply decided to die in order to give us a fighting chance to save everyone. Nobody said anything. They were feeling the weight of what was to come. The group wished they hadn't known most of the details now that they did. It was more than a nightmare for Naruto and Sasuke, and it explained everything about their personality changes. I can't imagine the Hokage allowing you two to return on your own like that. They should have been the first to arrive. I don't dislike you two, but... Why are you laughing? Ino yelled at the boys who had collapsed. The Hokage has returned. Sasuke yelled. Ino squeaked after blinking. No way. Did you, Sasuke? Certainly not. Do you really think they'd let me be the Rokudame after betraying Konoha twice? Dobi held the title of Hokage. Jaws dropped to the ground in response to Sasuke's declaration. Not only had Naruto accomplished his goal, but Sasuke, of all people, had betrayed the village twice. Not to mention the creator of the seal and ninjutsu used to return. The jaws dropped even lower. Don't act surprised. I told you I'd be Hokage. Aside from all the painting I did in the academy as a kid, don't you think Fuinjutsu would be a logical next step? I'd be legally permitted to draw on things. Naruto objected before breaking out in another fit of laughter. Asuma shook his head, realizing that Konoha's most surprising ninja had surprised everyone along the way. So, why are we preparing for the exams? Also, why is it necessary to complete missions during training? Shikamaru stepped in. The laughter abruptly ceased. In a few months, during the final round of the Chunin exams in Konoha, Orochimaru will invade Konoha as the Otokage but disguised as the Kazekage, backed by the forces of Oto and Suna. Not only will the Sandaime perish, but so will a slew of other ninja. That was the case the first time, but things have already begun to change. Regardless, we must be prepared in case it occurs. Naruto responded solemnly. The group came to a halt as the information became clear. If that's the case, why haven't you informed the Hokage and let him handle it? Ten inquired, apprehensively. I don't believe the scheming backstabbing asshole. Everyone was startled when Naruto snarled. Sasuke leapt to his feet and placed his hand on Naruto's arm. Please, Hokage-sama, calm down. He spoke quietly, drawing Naruto's attention. He groaned and held his head. He was expecting the questions. Mostly Asuma's. What and why? Asuma and Guy sputtered, surprised by the outburst. He allowed Uzu to be destroyed. He allowed my family to die before I even met them. He purposefully kept me from my godparents. He let me live in the orphanage despite the fact that I had 2 perfectly good homes within the village. He withheld my inheritance. He assassinated Sasuke's family. Even after being informed of the impending invasion, he did nothing to properly prepare Konoha for Orochimaru, and he irritated me by lying to me for years. During the war, the so-called professor, and heir to the god of shinobi, did little to help. You explain why. Naruto was struggling to keep himself under control, and he could feel Kyuubi's chakra rising. As they processed what they had heard, the campsite fell silent. If what you're saying is true, it means my father violated one of Konoha's oldest and most important treaties, dating back to the village's founding. Asuma nearly yelled in surprise. Kakashi averted his gaze. Asuma, you are correct. We went to Uzu and went over the day of the attack. Within 5 minutes of the incident beginning, a call for assistance was issued. Uzu Shiokage's forces waited 4 days for reinforcements before succumbing. He muttered something that made Asuma sick. He had no idea his father was capable of being so callous and cruel. The Uzumaki were the village's founding clan and the most prominent clan in Uzushio-kagure. Similarly, the daimyo was an Uzumaki. Before the inquisitive Nara could respond, Sasuke spoke up. Dobi's mother was one of the few survivors, and only because she had already gone to Konoha on the Shodai's wife Mito Uzumaki request. Senju's the area became deafeningly quiet once more. Shikamaru looked around after a few moments and nodded to himself. So, what are we waiting for? We need to protect the village and deal with a traitor. Everyone in the clearing nodded, much to Naruto and Sasuke's surprise. Then Neji came up with an idea. You and Sasuke, Naruto, said that some of the strongest ninja in history had been resurrected. Naruto interrupted him before he could finish. I'm afraid your father was one of them, Neji. Asuma was also exempt because he died before the declaration. Team 10's eyes widened, and Neji felt a surge of rage well up within him. How dare they desecrate his father's grave and disturb his final resting place? I agree with Shikamaru. Let us get started. With barely concealed rage in his eyes, he stated. Naruto nodded and turned to face Kakashi. You've been warned about what's coming, and you know how to prepare us. We have a better understanding, and we can assist you if you need it, but you are the sensei here. Naruto smiled as he noticed the Jonin's surprised expression. How many of you are doing SEAL training? He looked at Guy and Asuma after a brief moment. Really? They only flinched and nodded. They hadn't given any SEALs to their teams yet because, as far as they knew, they didn't need to train them that much. They were obviously mistaken. We'll put on the SEALs and then ease you into the training regimen we'll be using from now on. Just a heads up. If you die during an exercise, you must still complete the task at hand. Understand? The genin took a deep breath and nodded. They had a bad feeling about this for some reason. The first week of training was a living nightmare for everyone involved. Kakashi didn't give up on anyone, not even the other Jonin. Naruto and Sasuke occasionally spoke up to offer suggestions, but for the most part they simply followed orders or worked on something else if they had already completed the exercise. It didn't take long for the group to realize how much training they needed to do to catch up. Naruto and Sasuke were doing laps around them in almost everything, despite their younger, weaker bodies. As a result of training with them, Hinata and Shino had surpassed them. One of the challenges that the two time travelers faced was ensuring that everyone was at the same level as they were at the start of the Fourth War before teaching them anything new and teaching them the strengths and weaknesses of each of the Akatsuki. The day was divided into 2 parts, physical training and mental and medical training. As a result, they were already making strides toward their ultimate goal. Kakashi smiled to himself as he looked around at the group of genin training themselves into the ground. After hearing what the two boys had gone through, the teams made it their personal goal to ensure that it never happened again. Or, at the very least, by themselves. He nodded, looking down at a list he had made for their training and the missions they had chosen. He had planned for specific missions to be completed at regular intervals, and it was time for them to begin their training missions. Okay, everyone. I'd like you to come over here and take a break. I believe it is time to begin the first mission. Depending on how these go, we'll either do more right away or do some more training first.
Kakashi called to the genin, who stopped what they were doing and walked over to the silver-haired man.
They'd been working themselves nearly to death, and this was the first time he decided to call a halt to the torture. Now, I know that some of you have already made your first kills, but I've been told that some of your jonins haven't made it that far. As a result, we will take care of that today. A large bandit camp to the south of here has been causing problems for the nearby villages. Normally, we would have done this sooner, but I was waiting for the entire camp to be present so we wouldn't have to waste too much time looking for them. Gather your mission supplies in 5 minutes and you'll be ready to go. As they dashed away, he informed them. When someone did not arrive on time the last time, the entire group was punished. Kakashi smiled as he looked over at his fellow jonin. Are you having fun? Many miles away. As the door to their hideout closed, the bandits stretched out and relaxed. They had been fortunate enough to make an abandoned fortress their primary residence, and they had ensured their safety within it. It had taken nearly 2 years to repair the building's damage, but there were few, if any, problem areas. Because of this, they felt secure in the knowledge that they were safe. After all, who would hire ninja for a bandit group when the total number of enemies was unknown? That was something the Cage would look for before approving a mission. Hey, have you had any luck lately? One of them called to a friend who was relaxing. Not at all. I believe we'll need to spread out more. The areas around here have been cleared, and the boss does not want us to bring anyone back here so that the ninja are not summoned. He returned my call. He sighed and reached for a drink, settling in for a long night. Every now and then, the entire group returned, and it quickly became extremely noisy. He preferred it when it was quiet because most of the fortress was deserted. The guards were getting bored up on top of the fortress, watching for anything suspicious. No one had ever dared to come this far, so why did they need to stand guard? They'd rather be inside, partying with everyone else. Or, even better, raiding a town or village with a different type of party. The guards, however, were not ninja, and they were easily dispatched when a dark blur raced from the shadows and swiftly broke their necks. Lee landed on the ground, flinched at the bodies below him, and quickly scanned the roof. He waved quickly behind him because there were no visible enemies in his line of sight. Several Naruto clones emerged from the shadows, transforming into the deceased and taking their place. The bodies were sealed for later disposal. Each sector of the fortress they could reach had a similar sequence of events. The groups had been told that they needed to kill without blood so that the replacements would not be suspected. So far, everything had gone swimmingly. Naruto had clones in place of the now dead bandits by the time he had dealt with all of the sentries. The sentries would now keep everyone in instead of keeping everyone out. As all of the advanced infiltration squads reported success, Kakashi nodded. The strategy had been straightforward. Allow the faster, less squeamish genin to dispatch the visible guard, and then replace them with Naruto's clones. They would then make their way silently inside the fortress, dispatching any enemies they encountered along the way. They would either hide the bodies or seal them away so that they could deal with the group for a longer period of time. If necessary, the Jonin would step in. However, because this mission was to prepare them for war, they could hold their hands. It is possible for all kills to be bloodless. If not, the blood would have to be concealed as well. So far, there have been no issues. Each team was responsible for reporting as they went. Kakashi, are you sure this is a good idea? Regardless of whether they are ninja or not, they are still children. Asuma expressed concern for Choji's well-being. After all, he was a gentle child. When they accepted their headbands, they agreed to stop acting like kids and take on adult responsibilities. We're simply telling them to keep their word, he muttered. The older man nodded quietly and looked at the fortress, becoming anxious. They'd never practiced a mission before with a complete communications blackout. The genin were on their own and had to rely entirely on their teammates. If something went wrong, the Jonin would only know because a chakra flare was sent out. Kakashi and Zabuza, on the other hand, didn't seem concerned. Haku has completed her mission and is on her way to Ino's team to serve as backup. Zabuza reported smiling as an ice wall appeared in front of them. What? Gaia exclaimed, stunned. Haku's ice has replaced every reflective surface. We can now see everything going on inside the fortress. As a result, we can keep track of the genin. Zabuza elaborated. How come you didn't tell us? Asuma was taken aback. Haku was unsure whether she could set up that many surfaces. If she couldn't, she'd have an invisible sheet of black ice trail each team.
Zabuza replied, making the man nod.
It was better not to say anything until you knew what was possible. The Jonin watched, almost in agony, as the genin crept through the corridors, sometimes having to pick off members of a group one by one, other times being able to deal with their enemies without issue because there weren't many of them. They were all hoping that everything would be fine.
Kakashi and Zabuza knew that most of their teams were fine because they had done similar things before, but Zabuza was still concerned about Fu.
She'd never done anything like that before. With Ino's group, Ino wasn't having a good time. She had purposefully avoided the more gruesome aspects of the job when she signed up to be a ninja. She knew she'd have to face reality sooner or later, but she honestly expected it to be later. She was now slinking through an enemy fortress, killing everyone she came across. She hadn't wanted to kill in the first place, but she would not defy Kakashi's orders. She was certain she almost died the last time she did it. Haku rejoining the group almost scared her to death as the girl appeared to phase through the wall. As she slid from her mirror, Haku couldn't help but smile at the blonde. She had hoped to be able to provide a complete inside view, and she had succeeded. The training she was doing with Kakashi and the other genin and jonin was gradually improving her ice release, and she could see the results. Looking over at the other member of the team, Haku smiled reassuringly at Akamichi, who was looking a little pale. He was similar to her. He despised fighting and killing, but would gladly do so for his beloved people. She wanted to encourage him, but that would require talking, which they weren't allowed to do. Choji was having difficulty accepting what he was doing. He despised inflicting pain on others. He'd always viewed being a ninja as a way to protect his loved ones, but he'd always tried to ignore the killing aspect of the job.
But now he was being asked to confront it.
He wasn't sure he could, and he wasn't sure how long he could remain silent. Despite feeling the same way he did, the girl next to him seemed to have found a way to deal with it on her own. Maybe he'll seek some advice. He braced himself as they approached another band of bandits. The attack was quick and their deaths were painless, which was more than they had previously allotted to their victims. Haku used her senbon to hit lethal spots on the neck, while Ino used poison-coated senbon. The poison was so poisonous that it killed in seconds. All it took was a hand over the enemy's mouth and a small prick of the senbon to knock him out. Her method was precise because the poison was fast-acting and only took a few seconds to work. His, on the other hand, relied on brute strength to quickly and efficiently break their necks. Unfortunately, his clan relied too much on brute force and not enough on actual stealth tactics. As a result, his killings were the most brutal and traumatic of the group. They continued on, sealing those bodies away. Shikamaru's entourage. Shikamaru was both pleased and disappointed by the turn of events. He had always reasoned that he would have to kill at some point. So it wasn't all that surprising that he was. He was less shaken by the experience because, unlike his teammates, he never ignored the more gruesome aspects of being a ninja. That's not to say he wasn't shaken in any way. He didn't want to take someone's life, but he also knew that it was a necessary evil. The abundance of shadows that ran the length of the corridors made him happy. With a small chakra fluctuation, he was almost certain to sneak attack his targets. While they were warned against using jutsu due to the possibility of ninja, he lacked stealth. He wasn't particularly strong, and his poison knowledge wasn't as extensive as Ino's, so he stuck to his specialty. Fu was trembling slightly next to him. She'd never been ordered to kill before, and she's not sure she can do it for much longer. Unlike Shikamaru, she used her natural strength to her advantage, so her kills were more personal. Each death she caused felt almost self-inflicted, and she was losing her cool. She was just relieved that there hadn't been as many groups so far. She was aware, however, that the closer they got to the center of the building, the more likely there would be more people close together with whom her team would have to deal. As a hand landed on her shoulder, she gave a quick smile to the boy next to her. Shino kept a wary eye on the girl next to him as she struggled not to fall apart. Fu was probably the last person you'd expect to kill you. The girl, however, was not only a Jinchuriki, but also a ninja. The fact that she had yet to make a kill in her career told him even more about the kind of life she had led. It told him that she was rarely allowed to leave the country and that she was less alone. Then there was the girl's lack of training prior to arriving at the Hidden Leaf. He refocused ahead of the team, smiling at her, and reined in his thoughts. He'd been asked to accompany this team because he'd done missions like this before. A similar setup existed in Nami. The only difference is that they didn't enter the compound until the majority of the enemies were dispatched. This time, that strategy would not have worked. Neji's group. Neji had been hesitant at first after being separated from his original team and placed under Hinata's command. He didn't want to spend much time with the heiress, and he even didn't want to have to obey the main branch. However, as he walked down the hall, the reason for this became clear. Hinata had obviously already completed a similar mission, as she dispatched the enemies in front of her with quick juken strikes. He had to admit that she had improved dramatically since the last time they had spared her, more than he had imagined was possible for anyone. His preconceived notions of destiny began to crumble with Naruto's story of time travel, and they had continued to crumble ever since. He couldn't decide what to think anymore. Lee was deafeningly quiet as he walked down the hall with his teammates. It was unusual for him to be so stealthy, but he had learned that there was a time and a place for his exuberance, and this was most emphatically not the time. He was a little irritated when he was separated from 1010, but he could see why. They had done bandit elimination missions before, but nothing remotely like this. Apparently, Team 7 had already completed one, and the Jonin had decided to assign a veteran of this type of mission to each team to assist them with it. It all made sense, and since they appeared to want to keep the groups to 3 genes or less, it was obvious that teams would be divided. Hinata, despite being an unlikely choice as a leader due to her shy nature, had seemingly come out of her shell and was leading the team brilliantly. Even if Neji wasn't thrilled to be led by her, he was. Hinata was slightly ahead of the team, trying to slow her heart rate. Yes, she had been on a mission like this before, but she would not have said she was qualified to lead the same type of mission, especially with her cousin on the team. She was still concerned that she would jeopardize their already frail relationship. Yes, Naruto had stated that he would speak with Neji, but she was still concerned. Furthermore, the last time she had done a mission like this, there had been some rather powerful ninja waiting for her. She was unsure she could take on another shinobi like Hiyari. She paused, taking a deep breath, as they ducked into the shadows to allow another group to pass. They made quick work of them, sealed the scrolls, and continued on, nodding at each other. She'd be relieved when this was over. Using 1010. 1010 knew she wouldn't enjoy doing missions for Kakashi if they were all like this one. Take down the fortress, he said, it'll be simple. She murmured quietly to herself. What part of infiltrating an old, literal fortress and killing everyone inside without being discovered was simple? In addition, she had been separated from her team and assigned to Naruto and Sasuke to lead her. It wasn't that the two of them were bad people. It was just that their teamwork was so good that they were constantly in sync. She felt like a third wheel on a date as a result of this. She was aware of why she had been assigned to work with them. She had few options for killing someone quietly as a weapons mistress. They had come to teach her. Despite their inability to communicate, they were doing an excellent job. Another thing that irritated her. Teaching without saying anything. Looking ahead, she sighed quietly, wishing the mission would be over soon. Naruto and Sasuke were having a mental debate about how easy the mission would be. They had both agreed that it had been far too easy thus far. There was little to no challenge, and no one seemed concerned about the alarming rate at which people were going missing. There was also something that made them uneasy. Neither of them expected this mission to become unexpectedly difficult, but the way things were going, that was exactly what was going to happen. They quickly dispatched another group of bandits and headed deeper into their assigned sector, hoping they were wrong. Outside, the Jonin were keeping a close eye on the mission's progress. They, too, were thinking the same thing as the Rokudame. There should have been a hiccup or surprise around one of the corners, but there hadn't been. None of them wanted an unwelcome increase in difficulty, but they couldn't help but feel like they were going to get one. They've cleared out the corridors. It's time for them to go down to the next floor and start working on the rooms. Asuma exhaled a calming breath. Guy silently nodded. He couldn't help but be pleased with how well his team was performing. Neji in particular. He had been concerned about sending the Hyuga out with his cousin, but his concerns appeared to be unfounded. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened yet. This appears to be far too simple. Kakashi murmured. I know. Something will take place. But I don't see how. We've covered the entire structure from top to bottom. Zabuza's pupils constricted. Not the entire structure, but only the floors and rooms with reflective surfaces. There are most likely many rooms and corners that we cannot see. Kakashi responded, causing the Jonin to tense up. That is most likely when something will occur. Somewhere we can't see. That's an excellent point. I must admit, however, that I have never seen my team use such stealth before. Guy's response caused the other Jonin to gape. Have you ever tried convincing them to use stealth? Well said, Asuma. Kakashi returned his gaze to the ice, groaning as the genin cleared out one room at a time with surprising ease. Given that the majority of the targets in those rooms were sleeping, it wasn't too difficult. However, every now and then, they had to work quickly to prevent any sound from escaping. Fortunately for them, the fortress was massive and the rooms were well spaced apart. Each genin team's 3 floors came to a halt at a door and nodded to one another. They were dealing with the last of the stealth kills outside of the main area, on the floor beneath them. Kakashi tensed as they began to open the doors. We can't see anything in those rooms. That was all he could say before an explosion blinded and destroyed Haku's mirrors, cutting off their only way to monitor the genin. They jumped to their feet and ran for the fortress. They had anticipated this outcome. It was never easy when Team 7 was present. Fortunately, most of the enemies had already been dispatched, so they wouldn't be swarmed. Furthermore, the clones on the roof would be rushing down to prevent anyone from fleeing, providing backup. Kakashi simply hoped that it would suffice. Hurrying to the fortress when the answer hit Kakashi, he couldn't help but think of possible scenarios and reasons why the ambush hadn't been spotted ahead of time. Either the fortress had long been rigged and fortified with seals, or one of the new enemies was at least proficient in Fuinjutsu. He sped up, cursing. Each Jonin was assigned to a different team in the hopes of saving their genin. Team Ino. Ino groaned, coughing as the dust cleared. They hadn't expected a trap to go off right away when they opened the door. Thankfully, Haku had quickly created an ice shield to shield them from the worst of it. When she looked over at her teammates, she saw that Choji and Haku were fine, if a little shaken from the trap, just like she was. At the very least, it wasn't just her. Is everyone okay? Haku inquired as she stood up and dusted herself. She had acted instinctively. She had never been more grateful for Zabuza's tortoise training than at that moment. Why? Yeah, Choji responded. Looking into the room, he squinted to see if anyone was inside or if it had been set up as a trap for any intruders long before they arrived. A lone man stood inside, carefully watching them. I'm surprised you made it. You should have died as a result of that. He mused as he took a closer look at the team. Genin is very likely. That implies that a Jonin exists somewhere. Interesting. There is a Yamanaka and an Akamichi but no Nara as far as I can tell. Was there one in the class, or did they fight? He pondered. He had warned the bandits that this would happen if they did not exercise greater caution, but they had not heeded his warning. They now had to contend with pesky shinobi. He shrugged and concentrated on the task at hand. He didn't expect to have much trouble with the two known ninja, but the other girl was perplexing him. What was her name, and why was she filling in for Nara? There was no way she could be a better tactician or that her skills would complement theirs more than Nara's. I know who the two other people are, or rather the clan and techniques they use, but I can't match you up with any Konoha clan that I'm aware of. Perhaps a Kurama? No, you must train to become a member of that clan. They rarely, if ever, prioritize physical training. Could you possibly be a Nara? No way, you don't have the clan crest or the typical clothing choice. There are no feral markings of the Inuzuka clan or the Aburame coat. Definitely not a Hyuga, and all of the Uchiha were killed. That leaves the Sarutobi family. He mused aloud. Haku's eyes narrowed as he attempted to locate her and thus her techniques. He's fine. She reflected to herself. Well, I think it's extremely impolite not to introduce yourself before attempting to figure out who I am. Haku snapped at the man as she began to analyze the rooms subtly. Don't be concerned about it. If you want to stay alive, you'll have to show me your techniques. He said this as he shifted his stance and then faded from view. Haku's years of training with Zabuza to master the silent killing technique enabled her to quickly pinpoint his location as she lashed out with her foot, catching him in the abdomen. Do you think you're a genin? His eyes narrowed as he inquired. He was moving at Jonin's speed, but she had caught up to him as if she could follow his movements. Keep an eye out. In terms of speed, he is at least Jonin. Approach this if you're doing Sasuke's survival training. Haku spoke quietly to her teammates, who nodded in agreement. They took a deep breath to sharpen their focus and looked wearily at the enemy. Even though they were used to sparring with Sasuke, he was still light years ahead of them in skill. They were almost relieved, however, when the enemy began to weave seals that they recognized. Choji shifted behind Ino as he moved next to Haku. Both of the girls are flying through the same seals. Jikaki no Jutsu, Kaiten. Sweden. Tepdama, they both said at the same time. The jutsu collided and blew up. The enemy cursed as steam filled the room. He hadn't expected two of the three to be familiar with elemental jutsu. Even more so for a Yamanaka to be acquainted with them. Most clans concentrated solely on clan training. It appeared that his knowledge of the two clan ninjas needed to be updated. Perhaps it was luck that caused him to move, but he wasn't going to question it as something flew past his face while several objects impaled his legs. Standing shakily, he quickly realized that he should have paid far more attention to the unknown because his limbs were stubbornly refusing to function properly. It's most likely Senbon. They went through pressure points. She must be a medical student. His thoughts were cut short when he noticed a massive object moving through the steam towards him, and he realized what it was as he moved to avoid it. Unfortunately, it was too late to move out of the way of the Akamichi's fist thrown in front of him. A loud crack rang out in the room, followed by silence. With Neji's group. The two Hyuga took their time standing and looked around the destroyed room with trepidation. They had only just caught sight of the exploding tags when the door opened and jumped back, grabbing Lee. They were lucky because they would not have been able to move otherwise. Are you okay, Neji ni-san? Hinata inquired. Hi. She sighed, turned to face Lee, and smiled as he flashed a bright smile. That explains everything. There are two Hyuga. A cold voice rang out. When they turned to face the owner, they were met with an imposing 6.5-foot mountain. I assume you set off those explosions. Neji growled. The man smirked coldly and returned his gaze to Hinata. Shouldn't I be honored to be the heiress herself? He scowled. Hinata slid into her personal stance and waited, her Byakugans blazing. Neji and Lee took their own positions next to her. The mountain rushed forward, growling at being ignored, hoping to catch the genin off guard, only to dodge at the last second to avoid a palm thrust to the chest. You're faster than you appear. Neji remarked dryly. The man sneered angrily and charged forward once more. Hinata began weaving through his attacks, looking for an opening. One obtained by the team after Lee slammed his foot into the man's side of the head. Fortunately for us, Lee is as well. Skidding across the room despite several strikes, the man flipped and landed on his feet with surprising agility. I see. You have an advantage. Hinata drew his attention with a whisper. Your coils are barely used, implying that all of your chakra is dedicated to supplementing your taijutsu. A Hyuga is the worst possible opponent you could have chosen. As the taijutsu dance resumed, the man in front of them began to lose momentum with each strike landed by Neji and even the feeling in the limbs struck by Hinata. Every time he managed to breach their defenses, he was knocked away by the green-clad kid, allowing his teammates to recompose themselves. Despite his growing rage at not being able to land a hit, he was forced to fight defensively due to the fact that most of his chakra points had been turned off. Unfortunately, that didn't last long against a Hyuga, let alone two, and a kid who only had taijutsu. That sounded like he had a problem with the Hyuga clan, Neji. Lee spoke just as Hinata delivered a lightning-fast Juken strike to the heart. Must have been a Kumo nin who felt the country was duped 9 years ago. A cold response followed. Shikamaru's group. Left, right, duck. Shikamaru's thoughts raced as he kept a close eye on his adversary. The explosion had left Shino, Fu, and himself with only minor injuries. Fu, on the other hand, had recovered thanks to the Nanabi and had quickly begun treating their injuries. When they were attacked, they were forced to discontinue medical treatment. Their adversary appeared to be quite skilled at stealth and had attempted to catch them off guard. Unfortunately, his shadow manipulation had resulted in the development of a sensory field. He had been experimenting with it and had spread it out as soon as he could while it was still in development. Fortunately, he had. Unfortunately, the opponent was proving to be a difficult target. Not only was his stealth impressive, but so were his speed and flexibility. Shikamaru, on the other hand, only needed to keep him still for a split second in order to execute their attack. Rinpungakure no Jutsu, hidden, the enemy's vision was obscured by a cloud of powder, and he would never see anything again as a dual Kaden. Jikaki no Jutsu engulfed his body and ignited the powder, claiming his life and causing a second explosion. I had no idea it was flammable. Fu pondered aloud. Naruto's group. Does Sasuke want to bet on when the next time we get a mission that goes perfectly? Naruto summoned his friend, who had developed a dangerous tic in his left brow. Sasuke had shielded his team with Susanoo as soon as the explosion went off, and the situation had deteriorated from there. They had been attacked by a ninja who had recognized the Uchiha clan's unique technique and had gone berserk when he saw it. Sasuke could only guess that he had met Itachi or Shisui when he was still alive and grieving for his loss. Or that he had fought in the previous war. Stay still so I can kill you. Ten groaned as the enemy nin screamed. What kind of moron would stop moving in order to be killed? Damn it, bitch, you hurt. As one of her kunai finally hit its target, he snapped. When Sasuke and Naruto saw the mark, they grinned and nodded to one another. They jumped back and began weaving seals at the same rate. Jikaki no Jutsu, Katen. Fton, Repish. The wind-powered fireball ravaged the room, devouring everything in its path. Tensing his muscles and preparing to leap out of the way, the nin developed a panicked expression as he realized why they had finally fallen back and away from taijutsu. The kunai that had nicked him earlier was laced with paralytic poison. He could no longer move and watched helplessly as the fireball engulfed him. That seemed a little anticlimactic. Ten simply pondered. Naruto laughed slightly. That may be true, but it was worth testing the strategy to see if it worked. However, keep in mind that we taught you the puppet jutsu for a reason. He groaned, causing the girl to sheepishly laugh as she gathered the weapons that had survived the jutsu. Standing up straight and turning to face her team, she saw Sasuke removing the nin's head after he let out a painful groan. You resisted. He accused the pouting blonde. You, too. Ten sighed. They couldn't possibly be their future's hope, could they? Following the conclusion of their fights, the genin quickly met up with the jonin. The jonin were understandably surprised, but soon realized that each of the enemy nin, while powerful, had underestimated their team's strength. After finishing the last of the bandits, they sealed everything of value and exited the fortress, detonating exploding tags along the way. The Jonin thought the genin had done exceptionally well. They had little trouble with their adversaries and had capitalized on each other's strengths. Excellent timing enabled excellent combinations in a quick fight. Minor injuries from the explosion had been quickly healed, and the group returned to training camp after informing the nearby villages that the mission had been a success. Kakashi, we need to work on ensuring that each team has a talented sensor who is using their talents subconsciously at all times. Naruto said as they returned to their makeshift home. Those of us with sensory abilities, admittedly, were not using them because we didn't expect much resistance. However, if the teams had moved any slower, any of us could have been injured or worse. When Sasuke realized he hadn't taken the mission seriously, he nodded and flinched. As it stands, Sasuke and I must work hard to resume taking mundane missions like these seriously. We made a mistake on that one. The future Hokage admitted to himself that he was wincing. Kakashi nodded and began to change the genin's training schedule to reflect the necessary changes. He had agreed that the team needed a little more work and knew exactly how to get it done. I concur. Get some rest. We'll resume in the morning. He gave the order, and everyone went to their tents, eager to get some rest. After all, they were going back to hell the next day. Following the first mission, the genin's training was doubled and more exercises were added. Kakashi had apparently taken the suggestion for a sensor on each team and decided to ensure that they all had some sensory ability. How did he do it in a time when sensors were scarce? When you start getting sneak attacks at night after a long day of training, you start noticing little things like that. After everyone had mastered basic sensory techniques, they were put to the test to ensure that they were always alert. This meant using Hinata and Neji's chakra to create a net in which they could track moving objects. This meant they'd have to figure out how to make their chakra thin and invisible to other sensors. Of course, this meant getting it past Naruto, which was easier said than done. Despite this, they were back on the mission trail in no time, and by the time they reached the halfway point in their training, they had completed well over 50 C rank missions. Kakashi would also assign multiple missions in the same area and have the teams complete them all at once to get them used to working in a wartime setting with few breaks. Despite this, there were very few, if any, issues. That's when they got the shock of their lives. Congratulations to everyone. Naruto and Sasuke just told me that you've surpassed your 5th war skill levels. Excellent work. Kakashi congratulated the twitching genin. However, you aren't ready for the Jubi or Madara yet. Are you serious? Ino screamed. How could they not be ready for the 4th war if they had surpassed their 5th war levels? Nope. Sasuke said, and both of them nodded. If you want to know why you aren't prepared, we will show you where we were when we fought Madara and the Jubi. Remember that neither of us was a match for them. Naruto said this, and the two let go of their chakra control. They were coated in chakra almost instantly, and the ground seemed to almost shy away from the force that they were exuding. Naruto was almost immediately engulfed by gold, flame-like chakra, and black markings spread across his body. The two grumbled slightly at the force of the chakra as they looked at their comrades, who were staring in shock. Then, almost as quickly as it arrived, it vanished, leaving almost no trace of its presence. That's where we were, and we were barely able to fight Madara. With all 8 gates open, Guy was only slowed for the 15 seconds it took him to regenerate the damage. That is the situation you are in. Keep in mind that Sasuke and I couldn't beat or stop Madara. Naruto said, slightly wincing as he moved his arm. Are you okay, Dobi? My body is still not prepared to withstand the force of Kyuubi's chakra. What I can use won't last long. My reaction times haven't returned to normal, and Senjutsu is currently out of the question. This is bad because I might still need it to fight Orochimaru. He sighed. Oh my god. Madara is more powerful than you too? When your chakra flared, I almost passed out. Ino exclaimed as she felt fear creep into her. Yes, but keep in mind that we still have time before we face Madara. We also know who resurrects him, and as far as we know, he is the only person who knew where to find his remains other than Orochimaru. Making the genin nod in fear, Sasuke pointed out. Naruto sat down tiredly and looked at the Jonin after a second. I require assistance. Sasuke and I have reached a fork in the road that we must cross before proceeding any further. The Jonin looked surprised and sat down, indicating a break. Orochimaru attacks Team 7 during the second phase of the Chunin exams and bestows the Cursed Seal of Heaven on Sasuke. I've already mentioned it to some of you, but this is the issue we're facing. The seal is a major factor in Sasuke's departure from the Hidden Leaf. It not only allowed Orochimaru access to his mind, but it also brought his darker emotions and ambitions to the forefront of his mind, making him even more obsessed than he was before. Preventing this would ensure that there are no problems later on. Even though I know Sasuke is more mentally sound this time, there are still risks. Naruto elaborated. Asuma cocked his head and blinked in interest. Like what? There is a 10% chance of survival. Instability of the mind. The ability to be manipulated and controlled. Personality evolves. Naruto rambled on. So what is there to question? Shouldn't it be avoided? Ten inquired. However, it also allows the recipient to access Senjutsu without training and gain a quick power boost that could easily place an average genin on par with a Jonin or even an Anbu. Naruto mentioned making the genin blink. Sasuke had mastered the seal and could pull Senjutsu through his Susanoo. It was a potent weapon in his arsenal. However, the Senjutsu is tainted and can easily overcome and enslave the person using it. I've created a seal that can remove the negative aspects of the seal and purify the Senjutsu, but Sasuke and I aren't sure if we want this to happen or if it's worth it. He could learn Senjutsu on his own, so it's not like he's cut off. But the seal negates the real thing's limitations. Limitations? Kakashi inquired, having never heard of it. The time required to gather the Senjutsu, the time limit for using it while moving, and the inability to gather the Senjutsu while moving. I haven't found a way, at least not yet. Naruto exhaled a sigh. Kakashi gave a nod. Those are obstacles worth overcoming. I see. Add in the possibility that Sasuke will die this time, and you have a very high risk. You have to consider what will happen if Orochimaru fails to give him the seal again this time. Shikamaru brought this up. As the group attempted to decipher the complex problem presented, the clearing fell silent. Fu's eyes brightened up all of a sudden. You stated that the main reason for having the seal was to keep Orochimaru from changing his plans and to relieve Senjutsu constraints, correct? If that's the case, why not create a seal that can isolate the Heaven Seal as soon as it's placed, preventing its influence from spreading? Then, after a predetermined amount of time, slowly remove the seal so that anyone watching it will not notice until it is too late. That would also give you enough time to create a seal that mimics the Senjutsu portion of the seal and use it to eliminate the weaknesses in the use of Senjutsu that you mentioned. Brilliant. Naruto exhaled in awe. Sasuke's eyes widened in wonder. How could they have missed that? It allows them to pursue both options while also allowing the Dobi to use his Senjutsu more freely. It also implies that he will be less reliant on the power of a lunatic. You are a complete genius, Fu. Sasuke exclaimed with glee. Months of worry had vanished in an instant. How will you persuade Orochimaru that you have received and are experiencing the effects of the seal if it is isolated the moment you receive it? Ino inquired, perplexed. I remember how I felt the first time, and I'm a shinobi. I can pose as if it has taken root and use very subtle genjutsu to make him see what he wants to see. Sasuke responded cheerfully. The group nodded, satisfied that they had solved the problem, and returned to their training. Some time later, I returned to Konoha. I see. The group has completed an impressive number of missions during your absence, and according to your reports, your genin are significantly more powerful. Hiruzen stated after reading the Jonin's reports in front of him. He had to admit that when the large group entered his office, he had almost missed them. The genin didn't look like they had just graduated from the academy, but rather like seasoned shinobi. Even though they were in friendly territory, they were alert and almost tense. How come it appears that you have trained them for war? You can never be too careful. But now that you mention it. Kakashi pondered and returned his attention to the genin. You're on vacation until the Chunin exams start. However, I want each of you to do your own chakra exercises. Understood? The declaration deflated all of the genin almost instantly, and they returned to looking like new genin. Isn't it impressive? When Asuma saw the Sandame's face, she whispered. They have the intimidation factor if necessary, and they can make the enemy underestimate them simply by relaxing. Despite their appearance, they are very alert. The Sandame couldn't help but notice how impressive it was. He'd never seen anything like it before. What kind of training did you do to have such an effect on them? Almost immediately, the genin's faces turned horrified, and they began muttering words that sounded suspiciously like evil, sadist, hell, ambushes, and even first rule of Kakashi's training: do not speak about Kakashi's training. Sweating profusely, he stepped out of his office and sighed as the elders walked in almost instantly. They've returned, I see. I still believe that allowing them to leave was a huge mistake. Homura, I understand, but would you rather raise suspicion in front of the other Jonin and genin? Was one of them Inara? That is correct, but it still bothers me. Kaharu took a sniff. I'm also aware that they may have withheld information from their reports. I have no way of proving that they spent that much time getting the genin up to mid-Chunin level. That would not have gone down well in front of the genin, either. Hiruzen groaned. The longer they tried to figure out what happened, the more perplexing everything seemed to become. He was far too old for it. Naruto, for example. Is there anything I can do for you? If you're interested, I have a proposal. I'll consider it, Danzo. Naruto said this before vanishing and revealing himself to be a shadow clone. How did he know what I was about to ask and that I was following him? After 4 days. As many of you are aware, the Chunin exams are approaching, and any genin who has completed 8 missions is eligible to participate. Sandame addressed the group in front of him. Sandame-sama, I don't mean to bother you, but there's something that's been bothering me for a while. Everyone turned to look in horror at the Jonin who was on time when Kakashi spoke. How come we still have genin after the Chunin exam if the requirement is so broad and lenient? There are no level requirements for the missions as long as the first 8 are completed successfully. That is, if a Jonin wants to give up, they can complete 8D ranks and then nominate their genin. There is nothing to worry about if they fail because genin fail all the time, but if they die, no one questions the Jonin's training methods or the missions that they had completed. Isn't there a level requirement? As the man's words sank in, the room erupted in murmurs. They had never considered it before. Why were the qualification requirements so low? I understand what you're saying, Kakashi, but I have complete faith in my Jonin not to do anything so risky. We will now begin with the rookie teams. Many of the Jonin, as well as Iruka, thought they would pass up the opportunity as soon as he said it. After all, they hadn't been ninja for very long. I, Hitaki Kakashi, captain of Squad 7, comprised of Hyuga Hinata, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uzumaki Naruto, hereby nominate my team for the Chunin exams. I, Momochi Zabuza, captain of Squad 8, comprised of Aburame Shino, Uzumaki Fu, and Yuki Haku, nominate my squad for the Chunin exams. I, Sarutobi Asuma, captain of Squad 10, comprised of Narashi Kamaru, Yamanaka Ino, and Akamichi Choji, hereby nominate my squad for the Chunin exams. The room erupted in whispers about the Genin teams as soon as Asuma finished. Now, hold on a second. All three teams were my students, and while I admit they have improved, they are still far from prepared for the exams. It will annihilate them. Iruka yelled in defense. Actually, I believe the Chunin exams are far from prepared for them. Zabuza made some Jonin scowl with his joke. They had expected Zabuza to take over Squad 8 as soon as they heard about it, but not Kakashi and Asuma. Iruka, I understand your concern, and while I agree that it is a good thing to have for your students, you must recognize that they are no longer your students, and as such, you must have more faith in them. Kakashi reprimanded. Furthermore, they are soldiers, and they are our soldiers. We have a better understanding of their capabilities than you do. Kakashi. Iruka exclaimed in surprise, not expecting that from the Jonin who emphasized teamwork above all else. Enough. Do you truly believe the team is prepared? Sandame-sama, my team, has already completed an S-rank mission, so I am confident in their abilities. Many Jonin sputter as Kakashi spoke without hesitation. It was impossible for Genin to complete an S-rank mission. Very good. I've seen the results of your training with them, and I must admit that I was taken aback when you told me they defeated those three. Continue. I, Might Guy, captain of Squad 9, comprised of Rock Lee, 1010, and Hyuga Neji, hereby nominate my squad for the Chunin exams. The rest of the meeting went off without a hitch, and everyone was soon filing out. Iruka was depressed and quiet. He was aware that the Chunin exams had a high mortality rate, and that they had ended many careers of Genin who were not prepared for the stress. How could Kakashi be so careless? He wondered. You are welcome to join us for a training session if you want to ensure that I am not putting them in danger unnecessarily. From behind him, Kakashi said. I know you care more about Naruto than the others. Trust me, I would not have entered them if I didn't believe they were ready. In reality, I would have preferred to enter them separately or in the Jonin exams, but that would not have been permitted. Iruka scowled at Kakashi, but followed him to the training field where Team 7 was meditating. I thought I told you were on vacation? He made a joke about making the Genin look up. We are. We haven't had any intensive training or missions. Naruto mentioned, making Iruka groan. In that case, how about a light sparring session to keep your skills sharp? In an instant, all three Genin were on their feet and into their respective stances. That seems unusual, Hinata. It's a Juken variation I've been working on for a while, but I need to field test it against someone who isn't Sasuke or Naruto. Hinata admitted. Kakashi nodded, and the spar began.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.